Hello friends. What if one of the most impossible-looking engineering dreams in human history is suddenly becoming real? Imagine stepping onto a train in Europe and emerging in Africa through a tunnel beneath one of the most strategic stretches of water on Earth. No ship, no flight, no fantasy, just steel, rock, speed, and one of the boldest infrastructure ideas of the modern age. Because for decades, a physical link between Europe and Africa sounded like one of those grand visions people talk about, admire, and then quietly accept will probably never happen. Too expensive, too deep, too politically complicated, too technically extreme. And yet, here we are again, with the idea back in the spotlight, feasibility work revived, engineering firms studying the geology, and the world once more asking a question that sounds almost unreal. Could Europe and Africa actually be connected by tunnel? If you love megaprojects, secretive engineering plans, undersea construction, world-changing infrastructure, and stories that feel bigger than a movie, subscribe right now because this one is huge. The Strait of Gibraltar has always felt like a threshold. On a map, the distance seems almost insulting in its simplicity. Europe and Africa are incredibly close there, so close that the human mind immediately jumps to a seductive question. If they are that close, why are they still separated by one of the most powerful natural barriers in the region? But maps lie through oversimplification. Because what looks like a narrow crossing becomes something much more serious the moment engineering enters the chat. Depth, seabed complexity, geological instability, strategic shipping, international coordination. So, das ENT, costs, safety systems, ventilation, emergency access, and tunnel boring through conditions that do not forgive mistakes. Suddenly, this is no longer a line on a map. It is a civilizational challenge, and that is exactly why it is so exciting. A tunnel between Europe and Africa is not just transport. It is symbolism. It is geopolitics. It is trade. It is migration. It is tourism. It is diplomacy. It is logistics. It is identity. It is the kind of project that changes what people believe is physically possible. That is why the idea refuses to die. For some people, this tunnel represents unity, a physical connection between continents that have influenced each other for thousands of years. For others, it represents strategy, a new freight corridor, a new passenger route, a new economic backbone. For others still, it represents risk, because nothing on this scale comes without political tension, security questions, and enormous cost. And that is where this story becomes absolutely irresistible. Because under every megaproject, there are really two stories. The official one is about progress. The deeper one is about what progress costs. So let's imagine what this tunnel really means. A train enters the mountain infrastructure in southern Spain. It accelerates. The landscape disappears. Then comes the deep engineered world. Service tunnels, emergency systems, pressure controls, ventilation shafts, safety cross passages, power distribution, monitoring systems, and somewhere above you, cold water, seabed, geology, and one of the busiest strategic choke points in the world. That image alone feels cinematic, but the real story is even bigger. A Europe-Africa tunnel would not just connect two coastlines, it would reshape mental geography. People talk about continents as if they are emotionally fixed categories, but build the right infrastructure, and suddenly continents start to feel less distant, less symbolic, more transactional, more physically entangled. That changes trade logic. That changes mobility logic. That changes investment logic. That changes how states imagine the future. And this is why infrastructure is never just infrastructure. ITC, and a tunnel like this becomes a statement. We are not merely crossing water. We are redesigning proximity. That is why the world is fascinated by these kinds of projects. They expose something primal about modern civilization. We hate barriers that look conquerable. A mountain, tunnel it. A sea, Bridge it or go under it. A desert, lay rail through it. A kinti, ganti a sea, a continent gap. Turn it into engineering ambition. Humanity keeps looking at nature and asking the same question. Can we connect this? And the Strait of Gibraltar may be one of the most seductive examples of that impulse ever imagined, because the crossing feels so close, so obvious, so inevitable, until you remember that nature is not obligated to cooperate with human imagination. This is where the drama begins. The undersea environment here is not a clean, easy corridor waiting politely for a train line. It is geologically demanding, politically sensitive, technically punishing, and strategically loaded. Even small tunnel problems become giant risks when you are talking about long underwater sections, international cooperation, deep excavation, emergency evacuation, and an environment where every mistake multiplies. And yet, that difficulty is exactly what gives the project its mythic energy. Because if it is done, it will not feel like a normal railway. It will feel like a line history waited too long to build. Imagine what that would mean on a symbolic level. Europe and Africa would no longer be linked only by sea lanes and air routes. They would be connected by something more psychologically powerful, a permanent physical thread. And human beings respond to that kind of transformation instinctively. Once a route exists, it changes how the world is imagined. Places that once felt separated start to feel adjacent. Trade that once felt complicated starts to feel routine. Distance starts to collapse in the public imagination. Edgy and CI. A grand idea becomes normal. And that is always the moment when history quietly changes. But let's be honest, part of what makes this story so viral is not the transport logic. It is the audacity. Isi ace tunnel between continents. That phrase alone sounds enormous. It sounds like the kind of thing emperors would have dreamed about, futurists would have sketched, and engineers would have dismissed as too difficult, until eventually someone says, maybe not. Maybe the reason it still sounds impossible is because our instincts are lagging behind our tools. Maybe technology is catching up to one of the boldest geographic ambitions in the region. Maybe the line between dream and plan is getting thinner, and that possibility is thrilling. Because when the world talks about megaprojects, most people think of skyscrapers, bridges, airports, islands, dams. But tunnels are different. Tunnels are intimate acts of engineering domination. You do not decorate a tunnel into existence. You force passage through resistance. You bore through rock, uncertainty, darkness, pressure, and risk. AC, isi enmei. A tunnel is the purest expression of this idea. We are going through. That is why undersea tunnels fascinate people so much. They feel impossible, even when they exist. And a tunnel between Europe and Africa would sit in a category so mythic that the public would treat it almost like science fiction made concrete. But the project would also come with real questions. Who benefits most? Who controls access? How would migration politics shape public debate? How would freight transform regional economics? Would the tunnel become a triumph of cooperation or a flashpoint for strategic tension? Would it be sold as a symbol of unity while functioning as an instrument of power? That is how all world-scale infrastructure works. Under the language of connection lies the reality of control, and that makes the story even better. Because now it is no longer just about rock and trains. It is about influence, scale, précis, anti, dissemitsi anti, disi anti and mestige. Access, geography rewritten by force of will. No wonder people cannot stop clicking on stories like this. It has everything. 2 continents, Tantasia, Thentasias, Ici Antin, Amai. A narrow strait, a dream people keep reviving, insane engineering difficulty, future trade routes, political stakes, and the delicious possibility that something which sounds impossible may become real anyway. That is the formula for a perfect viral megaproject story. And maybe the most powerful part is this: the tunnel does not only promise faster movement, it promises a new mental world. A world where Europe and Africa are no longer over there from one another at this point on the map. A world where one train corridor reshapes the language of distance. A world where a feat of engineering becomes a civilizational symbol. If that happens, people will look back and say the tunnel did not merely connect two landmasses, it connected two imaginations. Of course, nature, money, politics, and time will all demand their price. Megaprojects love headlines before they love completion. And the bigger the dream, the easier it is to underestimate the hard parts. But that is exactly why this story matters right now. Because we are in that electrifying stage where a giant idea is no longer dead, yet not fully real. That is the zone where ambition becomes addictive, and that is where some of the best stories live. So if one day trains do glide beneath the Strait of Gibraltar and passengers move between Europe and Africa through one of the boldest tunnels ever built, it will not feel like a normal transport upgrade. It will feel like one of those moments when human beings looked at geography and decided it was negotiable. And maybe that is the deepest truth behind the project. Civilization advances whenever somebody refuses to accept that a barrier is final. Sea, mountain, continent. We keep returning to the same idea. If a path matters enough, someone will try to carve it, and few imagined paths matter more or look more impossible than this one. If this tunnel is ever built, people will call it practical, economic, historic. But before all of that, it is something else, audacious. And that is why the world is watching. If this story pulled you in, subscribe now, stay with me, and tell me in the comments, would you ride the train from Europe to Africa through a tunnel beneath the sea? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.